Tell me who did it." His voice was barely above a whisper. But in 20 years, every man in that room had learned that Giovanni Moretti was most dangerous when he spoke quietly. He stood over Lauren's chair, eyes fixed on the bruise that covered half her face, purple, swollen, brutally real, and something in him went completely terrifyingly still. Not anger. Worse than anger, the cold locked certainty of a man who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for one name to aim it at. Lauren's hands tightened in her lap. She hadn't come here to start a war. But looking at his face right now, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. She already had. If this story already has your heart racing, you are exactly where you need to be. Please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss a single chapter, and drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into part 1. Lauren Moore had a gift that most people would never call a gift. She knew how to disappear. Not literally, she wasn't a ghost, wasn't invisible to the naked eye. But she had mastered the art of existing in a room without being noticed, of moving through spaces that didn't belong to her, without leaving a single impression. In the mansion on the hill above Riverside Drive, where the ceilings were high enough to swallow sound whole, and the hallway smelled like old money, and a bench of flowers, Lauren moved like a whisper. A mop handle in her left hand, a cloth in her right, and her eyes always slightly downcast. Never meeting anyone's gaze unless spoken to. Never speaking unless spoken to first. She had learned that lesson the hard way. It was a Tuesday morning when she arrived at the mansion for her regular shift. She pressed her employee badge against the side gate reader, listened for the heavy metallic click, and stepped through without pausing. 7 years of showing up to this address had taught her that the gate was the only thing that ever greeted her warmly. Everything else inside that compound either ignored her or tested her. "You're 4 minutes late," said a voice from behind the supply closet near the side entrance. Lauren didn't flinch. She turned and saw Marcus, the head of household operations, standing with a clipboard pressed against his chest and one eyebrow raised like a bar exam question. "The 4 train had a signal delay at 149th, she said. "I don't manage trains, Lauren. I manage schedules." "Yes, sir." She said it the way she always said it, flat, cooperative, devoid of anything that could be interpreted as sarcasm. Marcus studied her for a moment, clicked something on his clipboard, and walked away without another word. Lauren exhaled slowly through her nose and moved toward her locker. This was her morning. Every morning, small humiliations wrapped in professional courtesy. She had learned to fold them neatly and set them aside. There was no room in her budget, emotional or financial, for the kind of pride that would cost her this job. Inside the employee locker room, she changed into her work uniform, dark navy trousers, a white collared shirt, and the navy jacket with the small gold crest on the left chest pocket. The crest was the mansion's insignia, a stylized letter M inside a laurel wreath, the Moretti family seal. She smoothed the jacket down, pulled her hair into a tight bun, and looked at herself in the mirror for exactly 3 seconds before turning away. She never looked longer than that. Not because she was ashamed of what she saw, because she couldn't afford the distraction of wanting something different. The mansion was already alive when she stepped into the main corridor. 2 other cleaning staff were moving quickly through the east wing, their carts loaded with fresh linens. A chef's assistant was rushing toward the kitchen with a flat of produce. Somewhere down the hall, behind the closed double doors of what Lauren privately called the war room, she could hear the low murmur of men in serious conversation. That sound was the background music of this place. It never stopped. Day or night, behind those doors, there was always someone deciding something that would reshape someone else's world. Lauren had learned not to wonder what was being decided. It was safer that way. She started her morning in the east corridor, working methodically. First the baseboards, then the crown molding, with the extendable duster, then the floors. She worked with a precision that bordered on ritual. Each movement deliberate, her mind simultaneously present and somewhere entirely else. She was thinking about Brittany. Her younger sister had called at 6:30 that morning, before Lauren had even finished her first cup of coffee, which she drank standing over the kitchen sink because their apartment didn't have a kitchen table anymore. They'd sold it 3 months ago when the second notice from the hospital arrived. They called again, Brittany had said, and Lauren had known immediately who they were. How much this time? About $412, past due. They said if we don't pay by Friday, they're sending it to collections. Lauren had closed her eyes. The number sat on her chest like a stone. $412. She could calculate exactly how many hours of work that represented, exactly how many subway rides, exactly how many lunches she would have to skip. "I'll handle it," she had said. "Lauren Savance, Brittany, I will handle it." There had been a silence on the line. The kind that was full of things neither of them said out loud, the years of handling things, the mountain of their mother's medical debt that never seemed to shrink no matter how many payments they made, the way both of them had quietly stopped talking about the future as if the future were a luxury they couldn't afford to imagine. "Okay," Brittany had said finally. "Okay." Now Lauren's mop moved across the corridor floor in long, even strokes, and she did the math in her head the way she always did that private arithmetic of survival. Her rent was $1,400 a month. Her share of the hospital debt came to roughly $300 monthly. Groceries, utilities, Brittany's community college textbooks. Her net pay after taxes, working in 6 days a week here, came to just under $2,200. The numbers never balanced. They were always in that narrow red zone between surviving and not surviving, and the only way to stay on the right side of that line was to never stop moving. She was so deep inside her own numbers that she almost didn't hear the footsteps coming down the corridor behind her. But she heard them, because in this house she had learned to always hear everything. The footsteps were different from the staff, too slow, too deliberate. The footsteps of someone who owned the floor they were walking on. Lauren moved her cart closer to the wall without looking up. She kept her eyes on the floor and her hands on the mop handle, and she breathed normally. This was the practiced response. Make yourself smaller. Make yourself part of the furniture. The footsteps stopped. She felt it before she understood it, the specific quality of someone's attention landing on you. The way the air in a room changes when a person of power looks directly at you. "You missed a spot," said the voice. Lauren looked up slowly. Giovanni Moretti was standing 6 feet away from her, watching her with the particular expression he always wore. Not warm, not cold, just intensely present, as if the act of looking at something meant he was already cataloging it, assessing it, filing it away somewhere in that dense and impenetrable mind of his. He was 51 years old, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who had spent 30 years winning battles that the rest of the world never knew were being fought. His hair was silver at the temples. He wore a suit that cost more than Lauren made in a month, but he wore it the way a craftsman wore a good work jacket, with comfort, not display. He wasn't looking at the floor where she'd been mopping. He wasn't looking at any missed spot. He was looking at her. Lauren felt the color climb her neck, but kept her face neutral. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti. I'll go back over it." "I'm joking," he said. She blinked. In 7 years, she had heard Giovanni Moretti speak to her exactly 14 times, and not once had any of those exchanges contained anything that could be described as a joke. She had no script for this. "Oh," she said. He studied her for another moment. "Then you're here early." "I'm 4 minutes late, actually." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the internal adjustment of a man recalculating. "Marcus told you that?" "Yes, sir." "Marcus tells everyone they're late. It's his only personality trait." He paused. "How long have you been working here?" The question surprised her. She kept her voice even. 7 years, Mr. Moretti." He nodded slowly as if confirming something he'd already known. 7 years, he repeated. Then he looked at her, really looked the way people almost never looked at cleaning staff, and said, "Do you ever take a day off?" Lauren didn't know how to answer that, honestly, so she answered it simply. "Not often." He looked at her for another beat. Then he said, "Good work," and walked away. Lauren stood very still for a long moment after he was gone. Then she exhaled, turned back to her cart, and told herself firmly that the exchange meant nothing. Giovanni spoke to staff sometimes. It happened. It didn't mean anything. She kept mopping, but her hands were slightly unsteady, and she didn't fully understand why. By the time her double shift ended at 9:15 that evening, Lauren was carrying the particular exhaustion that lives in the bones, not just the muscles, the kind that sleep can address but never fully fix. She signed out, changed back into her street clothes, a plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, beat-up Nikes, and folded her uniform carefully into her bag. Outside, the Bronx welcomed her home the way it always did, with noise and rain and the specific, honest chaos of a city that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. She liked that about the Bronx. It never lied. She had her earbuds in, but wasn't playing anything. She just wore them as armor, the universal signal of someone who does not want to be spoken to, a woman's essential city survival tool. The rain had started about 20 minutes earlier and was now coming down with the kind of steady seriousness that meant it wasn't stopping anytime soon. Her hood was up, her bag was across her body. She had 9 blocks to the subway, and she walked them the way she always walked them, quickly, purposefully aware. She passed the laundromat on Girard, where she recognized the woman who always folded other people's clothes for them for $5 per load. She passed the bodega with the hand-painted fruit signs. She passed the corner where 3 young men were having a conversation loud enough to be heard over the rain, and she crossed to the other side of the street reflexively, not from fear of them specifically, but from the practiced habit of a woman who minimized variables. She was 2 blocks from the station when she turned into the shortcut, the narrow street between the back of a closed dry cleaner and the side wall of an apartment building. She'd taken this route 100 times, 1,000 times maybe. It shaved 4 minutes off the walk and connected directly to the block above the station entrance. She knew every crack in that pavement. She was halfway through when she heard the sound behind her. Not footsteps, something else. The specific sound of presence, the way 2 people who are trying to be quiet are always slightly louder than one person who isn't trying at all. Lauren didn't slow down. She didn't speed up. She kept her pace exactly the same and moved her right hand to the pepper spray on her keychain, clicking off the safety with her thumb without taking it out of her pocket. Her heart rate elevated by a notch, but her breathing stayed controlled. She was assessing, not panicking. These were different things. "Hey," said a voice behind her. Low male, trying for casual and landing somewhere closer to deliberate. She kept walking. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Still walking. The second voice came from the side, and that was the thing that told her this wasn't random, wasn't opportunistic, wasn't 2 men who'd made a spontaneous decision. There was a second man at her 3 o'clock stepping out from the recessed doorway of the dry cleaner. She hadn't seen him because he'd been completely still and completely silent. He had been waiting. They had planned this. The cold understanding of that moved through her in a single instant. She spun toward the first voice and put 3 feet between herself and the doorway, son, in a single step, trying to create distance space, any geometric advantage at all. The first man was large, wearing a dark jacket with the hood up, and the rain was making his face hard to read, but his posture was the posture of someone who was very comfortable with confrontation. The second man was shorter, faster looking, and he was already moving to cut off the direction she'd turned to. "Wallet," said the first man. "Phone. Make it simple." Lauren's hand was on the pepper spray. She calculated the distance. Too far for a clean shot at the first one. Too close to the second one already. "Okay," she said. Her voice came out level, steady. She was proud of that later, looking back. "Okay, just..." The first man's eyes dropped to her chest, to the bag strap, to the jacket visible at the collar of her hoodie, to the gold-embroidered crest. She watched his face change. It was subtle and it was enormous at the same time. The casual, predatory confidence drained out of his expression, and something else took its place, something charged, electric, complex. His eyes moved to his partner, and a look passed between them that Lauren couldn't translate, but felt all the way down in her stomach. "That's Moretti's house," the second man said, low and flat. Not a question. The first man looked back at Lauren. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing something she had no name for. She pulled the pepper spray out. What happened next happened very fast. The first man moved not toward her, but sideways, and then forward in a motion that knocked her arm off course before she could deploy the spray, and she lost her footing on the wet pavement and went down hard on her left side, her elbow and hip taking the impact. Pain fired up her arm like electricity. Her bag was yanked off her shoulder in a single sharp pull. "Hey," she started. The second man grabbed her jacket collar and hauled her to her feet, and then shoved her back against the wall, and Lauren's skull connected with the brick hard enough that the world went briefly white at the edges. She stayed on her feet through pure stubbornness, her hands going flat against the wall to brace herself. "You work for Moretti." The second man was in her face now, close enough that she could smell the rain on his jacket, and his voice was doing something strange. It was angry, but it was also almost shaking, and shaking with anger, and shaking with fear. Feel almost identical, but are not the same thing at all. I clean his house, Lauren said. Her voice was still level. She didn't understand why that was the thing she was proud of, even as her vision pulsed from the impact against the wall. I'm a housekeeper. Who sent you? The question was so unexpected that for a half second she almost laughed. Nobody sent me. I'm going home. I just finished work. The first man had her bag now. He was rifling through it with quick professional hands. He pulled out her wallet, her phone. He pulled out her employee badge, the Moretti insignia clear and unmistakable in his palm, and he stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked at the second man with an expression that Lauren would remember for a long time afterward. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't satisfaction. It was the expression of a man who has just realized he has made a mistake that cannot be unmade. A man watching a door close behind him. Leave the badge, the second man said, and his voice had changed. Quieter now, more controlled, more frightening. The first man set it back on the ground without a word. They kept the wallet, they kept the phone. Then the second man looked at Lauren one final time and said in a tone of voice that was perfectly terrifyingly calm, "Tell your boss he should keep his people off our streets." And then they walked away into the rain. Lauren stood with her back against the brick wall for a long moment that she couldn't accurately measure. She was breathing. She was upright. She was cataloging the pain that was already speaking up from various points across her body, her hip, her elbow, the back of her skull, and now she reached up and touched her jaw and found that it had already begun to swell where the first blow had connected, the blow she hadn't fully registered in the chaos of what followed. She looked down at the badge on the wet pavement. She picked it up. She held it in her palm and looked at the gold crest of the Moretti family, the M inside the laurel wreath, and she thought with a clarity that surprised her given the circumstances those men were not random. They knew who she worked for. They had said it like a message. They had left the badge on purpose. The wallet and the phone were not the point. She was not the point. Giovanni Moretti was the point. She had just been the messenger. She made it home 45 minutes later. Brittany opened the door before Lauren had her key fully in the lock, and whatever Brittany was about to say about dinner or the hospital bill or anything else died completely when she saw her sister's face. "Oh my God," Brittany whispered. "Lauren, I'm fine." "You're not fine, your face. I need to sit down." Lauren stepped past her sister into the apartment, dropped onto the couch and held the badge in her lap with both hands and stared at the wall and tried to decide what to do next. Brittany was kneeling in front of her, hands on her knees, eyes wide and frightened and furious in equal measure. "What happened? Lauren, tell me right now." "I was mugged," Lauren said. "On the shortcut. 2 men. We have to call the police." "No." "Lauren, no police." Her voice was final, not panicked, certain, because the thing she hadn't told Brittany yet, the thing she was still turning over in her mind, was that the 2 men had not been ordinary muggers. Ordinary muggers didn't leave your employee badge on the ground. Ordinary muggers didn't deliver messages. And if you worked for Giovanni Moretti, even as a housekeeper, even as someone who cleaned his floors and polished his banisters and had spoken to him personally maybe 15 times in 7 years, you understood one thing with absolute clarity. You did not involve the police in anything that touched his world, because that was a line that once crossed could not be uncrossed. "Then what do we do?" Brittany's voice cracked. Lauren looked down at the badge in her hands, the gold crest, the M inside the laurel wreath. "I go to work tomorrow," she said quietly, "same as always." And in her chest, beneath the pain and the cold fear, a question had already taken root, small and insistent and impossible to ignore. When she walked through that gate tomorrow and Marcus told her she was 4 minutes late, and she went to her locker and put on her uniform, was she walking back into safety? Or was she carrying a message straight into the heart of a war? She held the badge tighter. The metal was cold in her palm. Outside the window, the rain kept falling on the Bronx, washing the streets clean of everything except the things that don't wash away. She didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in the dark with her eyes open and the badge on the nightstand beside her, and every time she came close to drifting, under her body jolted her back with the memory of hitting that wall, the crack of her skull against the brick, the cold of the pavement under her palm, the way that man's voice had gone quiet and controlled right before he said what he said. Tell your boss he should keep his people off our streets. She replayed it so many times that the words started to lose their individual meaning and become something else entirely. A drumbeat, a warning signal, a sound her nervous system refused to stop processing. At 4:30 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely, got up and stood at the kitchen sink drinking water in the dark. The apartment was quiet except for Brittany's breathing from behind the bedroom door. Lauren had let her sister believe by the time they'd gone to bed that she was calm, that she had a plan, that everything was manageable. She was good at that, at projecting a steadiness she didn't entirely feel, the way a ship's captain keeps their voice level on the deck even when the water below is doing something terrifying. She'd been doing it since she was 19 years old, and their mother first got sick, and someone had to be the one who held the shape of the family together while everything else bent. She looked at her reflection in the dark window above the sink. The left side of her jaw had swollen during the night. There was a bruise working its way up from her cheekbone toward her eye socket, purple-green and vivid. Her lip was split at the corner. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against her jaw and held the wince inside where Brittany couldn't hear it. Then she straightened up, set the glass down, and made a decision. She was going to work, not because she had fully thought through the implications, not because she had a plan for what to say or how to say it, but because the alternative, staying home hiding, pretending the night before hadn't happened, felt like a lie she couldn't afford to tell. The badge was on her nightstand. The message had been delivered. And somewhere on the other side of the city, in a house with high ceilings and old money, and men behind closed doors, deciding the shape of other people's worlds, Giovanni Moretti did not yet know that his territory had been touched. She was the only one who could tell him, and she had no idea if that made her powerful or very, very vulnerable. She left the apartment at 6:15 before Brittany woke up. She left a note on the counter that said simply, "I'm fine. Don't call me until lunch. I love you." She put the badge in her bag, pulled her hood up over the bruise she couldn't hide, and stepped out into the Bronx morning. The subway ride was 41 minutes, and she spent every one of them rehearsing what she was going to say. She ran through versions in her head, the way she might run through a math problem, testing different approaches, looking for the one that landed cleanest, caused the least damage. She could report it to Marcus. That was the official channel. File an incident report, let the administrative layer of the household handle it, stay in her lane. That was the safe choice, the invisible choice, the choice that kept her exactly where she'd always been. But those men had left the badge on the ground deliberately. They had said his name. They had sent a message that was meant to reach Giovanni Moretti specifically, and they had chosen her as the vehicle because they believed she was small enough, scared enough that she would either not deliver it at all or deliver it in a form so diluted by fear that it lost its shape entirely. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. She pressed her fingers to the badge in her bag and stared at the subway floor and made up her mind. By the time she arrived at the mansion's side gate, it was 6:58 in the morning. Technically 2 minutes early. She pressed her badge against the reader and walked through, and she kept her hood up until she was inside, and then she pulled it down, and she walked to the employee locker room, and she changed into her uniform, and she stood in front of the mirror and looked at her face for more than 3 seconds. For the first time in, she didn't know how long. She looked like someone who had been hit. There was no way around that. The bruise was a fact. The swollen jaw was a fact. She could not make herself invisible enough to walk through this house today without someone noticing. And since someone was going to notice, she was going to choose who that someone was. She walked out of the locker room and turned right instead of left. Right was not the east quarter. Right was not her assigned section. Right was the direction of the main house, the formal areas, the rooms that cleaning staff accessed only by appointment or direct instruction. She had no appointment. She had no instruction. She had a badge with a gold crest and a bruise that told a story she hadn't asked to be part of. She made it as far as the entrance to the main corridor before Thomas stepped out of nowhere and put himself directly in her path. Thomas was Giovanni's primary security attachment, not a bodyguard in the cinematic sense, not bulky or theatrical about it, but a man who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone whose entire professional purpose was to ensure that nothing unexpected reached his employer. He was 6'2" lean, with eyes that processed information the way a camera does, constantly neutrally without expression. "Wrong wing," Thomas said. "I need to speak with Mr. Moretti." Thomas looked at her face. For the first time in the years she'd known him to exist in this house, something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like a rapid recalibration. What happened to your face? That's what I need to talk to Mr. Moretti about. A pause. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, not the way most people looked at her, which was through her, but actually at her. Then he said, "Wait here." He disappeared down the corridor. Lauren stood very still, her hands at her sides, and concentrated on breathing the way her mother had taught her when she was small, and frightened of something in through the nose for 4 counts, out through the mouth for 4 counts, and keep your chin up, because you're a Moor and Moors don't fold. Her chin was up, her jaw was throbbing. She counted her breaths. Thomas came back in under 2 minutes. His face had gone professionally blank again, which told her nothing, and he said, "Follow me." She followed him. She had never been inside the room he took her to. It was not the war room behind the double doors. It was a smaller room off the side of the main hallway. Not large, not ornate, just a room with a table and several chairs and 2 windows, and the particular quality of silence that belongs to spaces where serious things get decided. Thomas opened the door, held it, and stepped aside. Lauren walked in. Giovanni Moretti was already there. He was standing rather than sitting, which she registered immediately as significant. A man who expects a brief conversation stands a man who intends to listen, sits down. He was in his shirt sleeves, jacket over the back of the chair, which she had also never seen before. He looked at her when she entered, and his gaze went immediately and completely to her face, and whatever he saw there made something in his expression shut very precisely the way a hand closes over something it intends to hold. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "Lauren." He said her name with a quiet firmness that was not a request and not a threat, and somehow more persuasive than either. "Sit down." She sat. He remained standing. He looked at her face in silence for a moment that stretched slightly past comfortable, and then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down himself, and he folded his hands on the table, the way a man sits at a table when he has decided he is going to hear every single word of what comes next. "Tell me what happened," he said. So she told him. Not the version she'd rehearsed on the subway. That version had been careful, edited, stripped of anything that might complicate things. What came out instead was the real version. The shortcut in the rain, the 2 men, the way they'd looked at her uniform, the way the energy of the whole encounter had shifted the moment they recognized the crest, the words one of them had said. She said those words exactly without softening them. "Tell your boss he should keep his people off our streets." She placed the badge on the table between them. She said, "They left that on purpose. They took my wallet and my phone, but they put that back on the ground. They wanted you to know." When she stopped talking, the room was very quiet. Giovanni looked at the badge on the table. He didn't touch it. His expression was completely still, not the stillness of a man who feels nothing, but the stillness of a man who feels a great deal and has spent decades building a wall between feeling it and showing it. She had seen that stillness before at a distance across rooms in moments that didn't involve her. She had never been this close to it. Then he looked up at her, and his eyes were doing something she had not seen them do before. Something direct, something that didn't perform the detachment his face had settled into. "You came here first," he said. "Before Marcus, before anyone else." "Yes." Why, Beta, the honest answer was the only one she had, because the message was meant for you, not for Marcus. He studied her. "You understand what it means that you came to me directly." She met his gaze and held it. "I think I do." "Do you?" His voice was quiet, not threatening, but carrying a weight that she felt settle across her shoulders. "It means I've crossed a line," she said. "From invisible to visible. I know that." Something moved through his expression. Something she couldn't name. He looked at her for another long beat, and then he said very quietly, "Who hurt you like this?" It wasn't a question. It was the particular cadence of a statement from a man who has already decided something and is waiting for the information that will tell him where to direct it. "I don't know their names," Lauren said. "One was tall, dark jacket, hood up. The other one was shorter, faster. The short one did most of the talking." She paused. "He wasn't scared of you. But the tall one was. I saw it in his face when he recognized the crest." Giovanni absorbed this without expression. Then he turned his head slightly to the right, a small motion almost imperceptible. And Lauren realized that Thomas was still in the room, standing near the door behind her, and that the small motion had been Giovanni communicating something to Thomas that required no words. She heard Thomas leave. The door closed. Now it was just the two of them in the room, and Lauren felt the shift in atmosphere, the way you feel a pressure change, not dramatic, not threatening, just different, more concentrated. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and waited. "You said they took your phone," Giovanni said. "Yes." "And your wallet?" "Yes." He nodded once. Then he said, "You have a sister." Lauren felt something cold move through her. "Yes." "Is she at home?" "She was when I left." "Thomas will send someone to your building, just to be present, not intrusive." He paused. "Is that acceptable to you?" Lauren stared at him. In 7 years of working in this house, she had built a careful picture of Giovanni Moretti. From pieces from overheard conversations, she pretended not to hear, from the way staff spoke about him when they thought no one was listening, from the specific atmosphere of an institution that runs entirely around one person's gravity. The picture she had built was of a man who was powerful, controlled, and fundamentally transactional. A man for whom other people existed primarily in relation to their usefulness. Not a cruel picture, not a warm one, just honest. The man sitting across from her right now was not fully consistent with that picture. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to." His voice was even. "Is it acceptable to you?" A beat. "Yes." He stood. She stood too, reflexively, not sure why, just understanding somehow that the formal part of this was over and something else was beginning. He picked up the badge from the table and held it out to her. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. She was specifically aware of that, the precise inch of air between his hand and hers. "Go to the medical room," he said. "On the second floor, east end. Tell Elena I sent you. She'll look at your jaw." He paused. "And Lauren." The way he said her name this second time was different from the first. Less instruction, something more unnameable. "You were brave, coming to me directly." She didn't know what to do with that, so she said, "I didn't feel brave, I just felt like I was doing the right thing." He looked at her for a moment that lasted one beat too long for a professional exchange. "Sometimes those are the same thing," he said. And then he turned away to the window, and she understood she was dismissed. She walked out of the room with her heart running fast and her jaw aching and her mind full of a noise she couldn't organize into anything clean. She found the medical room. Elena, a small, efficient woman in her 60s, took one look at Lauren's face and asked 0 questions. She pressed her fingers gently against the bruise, checked Lauren's eyes, examined the back of her skull with careful hands, and announced that nothing was broken, nothing was concussed, but the bruise was going to be spectacular for about 10 days, and Lauren needed to ice her jaw for 20 minutes every 3 hours. "Mr. Moretti sent you," Elena said, handing her an ice pack. "Yes." Elena nodded once and looked at her with an expression that contained something, not pity, not sympathy exactly, but the specific recognition of a woman who has worked in this house for many years and understands certain things about how it operates. "You take care of yourself, honey," she said. Her voice was matter-of-fact. "This place takes care of people it decides to take care of. Just make sure you understand the difference between being taken care of and being kept." Lauren held the ice pack against her jaw and thought about that sentence for the rest of the morning. She was back on her regular floor by 10 a.m., moving through the east corridor with her cart, her mop, her rhythm. The routine felt strange now, like a coat that had been altered slightly and didn't quite sit the same way on her shoulders. She moved through it mechanically, and she listened the way she always listened to the sounds of the house around her. But the sounds were different today. Not louder, not more visible. Quieter in a way that was itself a kind of loudness. Staff moved through the corridors with a slightly compressed energy, the way people move when they know something is happening in the rooms above them. 2 of Giovanni's men, not security. Something else, something harder, crossed the corridor ahead of her, without looking at her, moving with the focused, unhurried pace of men who have a destination and an intention. At 11:42, Marcus appeared at the end of her corridor. He walked toward her with a clipboard, which was normal, and looked at her face, which caused him to stop walking with a jolt, like a man who has just stepped on something he didn't expect to find there. "What happened to you?" he said. "I was mugged last night." Marcus stared at her. "Did you report it to the police, to building management?" "I reported it to Mr. Moretti." The silence that followed those words was its own kind of event. Marcus looked at her as if she'd just told him she'd grown a second head. His clipboard lowered slightly. His professional composure flickered. "You went to Mr. Moretti directly." "Yes." "Lauren." He said her name with the tone of a man choosing words very carefully. "That is not the correct chain of—" "He told me to go to the medical room," she said. "I went. Elena checked me. Nothing is broken. I'm back on schedule." She looked at him with the flat, cooperative gaze she had perfected over 7 years. "Is there a problem with my schedule today, Marcus?" He looked at her for a long, complicated moment. Then he looked down at his clipboard. Then he turned around and walked away without another word. Lauren watched him go. She felt something unusual moving through her, not quite power, not quite satisfaction, something quieter and more complicated than either. The line she had crossed this morning, the line from invisible to visible, was not a line she could uncross. She understood that. Elena had told her to understand the difference between being taken care of and being kept. She was turning that over, pressing on it, the way you press on a bruise to understand its shape. At 1:15 in the afternoon, her assigned floor was the second level, and she was working her way toward the end of the East Hall when she heard a voice from behind one of the closed doors. Giovanni's voice, low and precise, saying something she couldn't make out. And then another voice, one she didn't recognize, and then a sound that went through the door clearly enough that there was no mistaking it. A chair being pushed back very hard. The crack of something against a hard surface. And then Giovanni's voice, again, still low, still precise, but carrying now in a register she had not heard from him before. Not anger exactly, because anger implies something out of control, and there was nothing out of control in what she heard. It was colder than anger, more deliberate than anger. It was the sound of a decision being made out loud. "You have until tonight," Giovanni said through the door. "One name. That's all I'm asking for." Lauren moved her cart quietly past the door. Her hands were steady, her heart was not. She did not stop. She did not slow down. But as she turned the corner at the end of the hall and moved out of earshot, she understood with a cold and sudden clarity that the men who had hurt her last night had set something in motion that was far larger than a mugging, far larger than her bruise, far larger than a wallet and a phone taken in the rain. They had thrown a stone into Giovanni Moretti's pond, and they had used her face to do it. And Giovanni Moretti, she was learning, was not a pond. He was the kind of deep, still water that threw nothing back. He just held it and waited. And when he was ready, he didn't throw the stone back. He buried the person who threw it. By the time Lauren's shift ended that evening, 3 things had changed. Thomas had texted her a number to call if anything felt wrong at home. Her phone had been replaced, not by her. She had no idea how. But when she went to her locker, there was a new phone in an envelope with her name on it and nothing else. And on her walk to the subway, she did not take the shortcut. She took the long way. She took the lit streets. And she walked with her hood down and her chin up and the badge pressed against the inside of her mum, like something that had gone from being just a logo to being something else entirely. Something that meant she belonged to a world she had always been careful to stay outside of. The Bronx welcomed her back the same as always. Noise, lights, the honest chaos of a city that doesn't pretend. But she walked through it differently than she had walked through it yesterday. And somewhere behind her in the city she just left, a name was being found. The name came before dawn. Lauren knew this not because anyone told her directly, but because at 2:17 in the morning, her new phone lit up with a single text from Thomas's number. 4 words that contained everything and explained nothing. "Stay home today. Lauren." She stared at those 4 words in the dark of her bedroom for a long time. She read them the way you read something that has a surface meaning and a deeper meaning, and the space between the two is where all the danger lives. Stay home. Not you have the day off. Not feel free to rest, you've been through something. Stay home, as in the thing that is happening right now in the hours between midnight and morning is not something you should be anywhere near. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay back against her pillow. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the city outside her window, the distant sound of a truck, the occasional voice, the permanent low hum of the Bronx existing at full volume even at 2 in the morning. And she thought about the name, whoever it was, whatever they had told Giovanni in that room yesterday behind the closed door, after the sound of the chair being pushed back and Giovanni's voice saying, "You have until tonight." Someone had talked, she was sure of it. That was the thing about Giovanni Moretti, the thing she was only beginning to fully understand from the inside of it, rather than the careful outside distance she'd always maintained. People talked to him, not because he threatened them, or not only because of that, but because he had a quality sitting across a table from you, with his hands folded and his eyes completely present, of making you feel that not talking was the more frightening option. She had felt the edge of that quality herself just yesterday morning, and she hadn't even done anything wrong. She did not sleep again. She lay in the dark, and she waited for morning the way you wait at a train platform, when you don't know the schedule, just standing, just watching, just trying to be ready. By 6 a.m., Brittany was up, and Lauren could hear her in the kitchen, the sounds of coffee being made and the low murmur of the television news. Lauren got up, washed her face carefully around the bruise, looked in the mirror for the 3 seconds she normally allowed herself, then looked for 3 more, because the bruise had deepened overnight into something genuinely dramatic, a purple-green arc that covered the left side of her face from cheekbone to jaw and announced itself to any room she entered. She went to the kitchen. Brittany turned from the counter and looked at her face and said absolutely nothing, which was its own kind of conversation. She just handed Lauren a mug of coffee and sat down at the small folding table they used instead of the real table they'd sold, and Lauren sat across from her and they drank their coffee in the specific silence of 2 women who have shared a small apartment and a large amount of hardship for long enough that they don't need to narrate everything to each other. "You're not going in today," Brittany said finally. "No. They told you to stay home." "Yes." Brittany wrapped both hands around her mug. She was 24 years old and she had their mother's eyes wide dark, reading everything. "Lauren, how deep in this are you?" The honest answer was deeper than yesterday. The honest answer was, "I don't know yet, and that's the part that frightens me." What she said was, "I told him what happened. He's handling it. I stay out of the way while he handles it." Handling it. Brittany repeated very carefully with the exact tone of a woman who understands what handling it means in the context of Giovanni Moretti and wants her sister to say it out loud so they can both hear it plainly. Lauren met her eyes. "Yes." Brittany was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is that okay with you?" And Lauren, who had spent the night turning this exact question over in the dark, pressing on it the way Elena had pressed on her bruise, looking for its exact shape and weight, said, "I don't know yet." That was the most honest thing she'd said out loud since this started. Brittany nodded slowly. She didn't say anything else about it. She refilled both their mugs and turned the television up slightly, and they sat together in the morning noise of the apartment, and Lauren felt for a moment the strange specific comfort of being exactly where she was in her imperfect small apartment with her imperfect small life and her sister across the table from her before the day did whatever it was going to do next. The day did not keep her waiting long. At 8:47 in the morning, Thomas called. Not texted, called. Lauren answered on the second ring. "Mr. Moretti wants you at the house," Thomas said. No preamble, no cushioning. "You told me to stay home. That was at 2 a.m. Things have moved. He wants you here by 10. Lauren looked at the clock on the wall. "That's an hour." "Yes." "Thomas." She paused. "What's happening?" A brief silence. Not the silence of a man who doesn't know. The silence of a man deciding how much of what he knows is his to share. "He'll tell you himself," Thomas said. "Just come." She came. The mansion felt different when she arrived. She noticed it the moment she stepped through the side gate, a density in the atmosphere, a compressed alertness in the way the staff moved, the way even the building itself seemed to be holding something in. 2 men she'd never seen before were standing near the east entrance, and they were not staff. They had the particular stillness of men whose job it is to stand in places and notice things, and they noticed her immediately, and one of them said something quietly into a radio before she'd even reached the door. Thomas met her in the corridor before she reached her locker. He looked at her with his neutral camera eyes and said, "Don't change, he wants to see you now." "I'm in my street clothes." He knows. This more than anything told her how far things had moved overnight. In the ordered world of the Moretti household protocol was architecture, it held everything up. Thomas telling her to come to Giovanni in her street clothes without her uniform outside her scheduled role was a structural departure that meant the normal rules of this place were currently suspended. She followed Thomas through corridors she had walked 100 times with a mop and a cart, and now walked empty-handed, and the difference in how the space felt around her was disorienting in a way she couldn't fully explain. She was the same person. The hallways were the same hallways, but something in the equation had changed, and she could feel it in the way people's eyes moved to her and stayed a half-second longer than they should. Thomas opened the door to the same small room as yesterday and stepped aside. Lauren walked in. Giovanni was sitting this time. He had both hands flat on the table and his jacket on, and his expression was the focused, compressed stillness of a man who has been awake all night doing something that requires complete attention. Across from him in the second chair sat a man Lauren had never seen before, mid-40s. Well-dressed in a way that said money, but not this kind of money, with the particular tension of someone who is trying very hard to appear calm and not entirely succeeding. The unfamiliar man looked at Lauren when she entered. His eyes went to her bruise. Something happened in his face, a flinch, quickly controlled the involuntary physical response of a person confronted with a consequence they caused. Lauren went very still. She understood. Not everything, but enough. "Sit down, Lauren," Giovanni said. His voice was perfectly even. The evenness of it was the most frightening thing in the room. She sat. She was across the table from both of them now. The unfamiliar man was not looking at her anymore. He was looking at his own hands. "This is Vincent Caro," Giovanni said. "He has something he wants to say to you." A beat of silence. Vincent Caro's jaw moved. He looked up from his hands and met Lauren's eyes with the particular expression of a man who is doing something under a very specific kind of pressure but is trying to make it look voluntary. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what happened to you. It wasn't supposed to go that way." "Wasn't supposed to go what way?" Lauren said. Her voice came out even. She surprised herself. Vincent's eyes moved briefly to Giovanni and back. "My guys weren't supposed to touch you. It was supposed to be a message. Just the badge. Just leave the badge where Moretti's people would find it. Nobody was supposed to get hurt." "Your guys," Lauren said. "Yes. They put my head into a brick wall." She said it simply without heat, and somehow the simplicity of it landed in the room harder than anger would have. "They broke the skin on my elbow. They took my phone and my wallet and left me alone in the rain at 9 o'clock at night in the Bronx." She paused. "And you're telling me that was a message that went wrong?" Vincent Caro looked at her with the expression of a man who is experiencing the particular discomfort of being made to see something he worked hard not to see. "Yes," he said. "What was the message supposed to be?" Another glance at Giovanni. Giovanni said nothing. He simply watched with the quality of a man who has already heard all of this and is now watching someone else hear it for the first time and is measuring that experience with great precision. "Territory dispute," Vincent said. "The block your shortcut runs through. That's been under our organization's protection for 18 months. Your boss—" He stopped, rephrased carefully. "Mr. Moretti's expansion into the South Bronx has been encroaching on agreed-upon lines. The badge was supposed to be a signal. We know where your people go. We're watching." "You used me," Lauren said. "It wasn't personal." "My face," she said, "is personal." The room was silent. Vincent Caro had nothing to say to that. He looked at his hands again. Giovanni looked at Lauren, and in his expression was something she felt rather than read, a recognition, a careful attention, the look of a man who is reassessing something in real time. "Vincent," Giovanni said quietly, "will be addressing the financial losses you incurred, your phone, your wallet, and additional compensation for medical expenses and what I'll call the inconvenience." The word inconvenience was delivered with a precision that communicated clearly that it was a deliberate understatement, that both he and Lauren understood this and that Vincent understood it too. He will also be providing the names of the two men who were present in that alley. Lauren looked at Giovanni. "What happens to them?" He met her eyes. "That's not your concern." "It is, actually." She held his gaze. She felt the specific weight of everyone in the room. Thomas near the door, Vincent across from her, Giovanni directly in front of her, and she held it and didn't look away. "I'm the one they put in the alley. I'd like to know what's happening to them." Giovanni studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "They'll be reminded very clearly of the cost of touching things that don't belong to them." He paused. No one will die over this if that's what you're asking. She believed him. She wasn't sure she should have given everything she knew and didn't know about this man, but she did. Okay, she said. Giovanni nodded once, then he looked at Vincent. We're done. Vincent stood quickly with the energy of a man released from something. He placed a white envelope on the table thick without ceremony, and he said to Lauren, again, I'm sorry. And then Thomas was at the door, and Vincent Caro was gone, and the room contracted to the two of them the same way it had yesterday, and Lauren felt that same pressure change shift in the air. She looked at the envelope on the table. Take it, Giovanni said. I don't want his money. It's not his money anymore. It's yours. He paused. Lauren, take it. She picked it up. She didn't open it. She held it in her hands and looked at it and felt the weight of it and thought about $412 and a hospital bill past due by Friday and her mother's face and the way Brittany's voice cracked on the phone. Thank you, she said. The words felt insufficient. She said them anyway. Giovanni leaned back slightly in his chair. The formal posture of the meeting had eased in a way that was subtle but distinct. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the corridor that first morning, not through her but at her, and he said, You handled yourself well in here just now. I just said what was true. Most people can't do that in a room like this. He looked at her quietly. Most of my staff would have sat there and said nothing, accepted the apology taken, the money, kept their eyes down. I'm aware of that. She met his gaze. That's not who I am. Something moved through his expression. Something she was beginning to recognize, not a smile, not quite, but the shift that happened in the architecture of his face when something surprised him and he found the surprise worth examining rather than dismissing. No, he said, I'm noticing that. She did not know what to do with that sentence. She set it aside to examine later. Can I ask you something? He made a small gesture. Go ahead. Vincent Caro came here himself this morning at, she calculated, at whatever time Thomas woke him up to get here by 10. He sat across from me and apologized to my face. Men like Vincent Caro don't do that voluntarily. She paused. What did you say to him? Giovanni looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I told him the truth, which was that he had made the mistake of making something personal that I would have let be professional. He said it with perfect quietness. If his men had delivered their message to one of my people, someone who carries a gun, someone who knows this world, it would have been handled through the appropriate channels. Territory, negotiation, that's business. He paused. They chose a woman who cleans my floors and is trying to pay her mother's hospital bills. They made it personal. And I told Vincent what that meant. Lauren was quiet for a moment. The weight of what he'd just said was considerable, and she let it settle rather than rushing past it. And what did it mean, she asked, to you? He looked at her steadily. It meant I wasn't willing to let it be business. The silence after that was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of two people sitting with something that had just been said out loud for the first time, and both of them knowing that saying it out loud changes it from a private truth into a real one. Lauren looked down at the envelope in her hands. She thought about Elena's words, the difference between being taken care of and being kept. She thought about the line she'd crossed yesterday from invisible to visible, and about how she'd understood even then that it couldn't be uncrossed. She looked up. I'm going to change into my uniform, she said, and finish my shift. Giovanni nodded slowly. Of course. She stood. He stayed seated. She was almost at the door when he said, Lauren. She stopped, turned. He was looking at her with that direct, assessing gaze, and he said, You don't have to keep working here. Yeah, she felt the words land, turn them over. Are you offering me a different job? I'm offering you a choice. Most people who work here have never been offered one. He paused. You have one now. You can walk out that door, take the money in that envelope, and I'll make sure your sister's college is taken care of and your mother's debt is cleared. No obligation, no complication. She stared at him. Or you stay and understand that staying means things are different now. She held his gaze for a long time, long enough that the question he'd asked had time to fully open up inside her, all its implications, all its weight, all its danger, and all its strangeness. She thought about invisible. She thought about the 7 years of keeping her eyes down and her chin level, and her ambitions folded neatly away. She thought about two men in an alley who had looked at the crest on her chest and made her a messenger without her consent. She thought, I am already different. The choice was made in the alley, not in this room. I'll see you tomorrow morning, she said at the same time. She walked out. The door closed behind her. She changed into her uniform, pressed the badge against her chest pocket, and went back to the east corridor with her cart and her mop and her rhythm. But the rhythm was different now. Faster, more intentional. Because Lauren Moore had just walked into a room as a housekeeper and walked out as something the English language didn't have a clean, simple word for yet. Not protected, not kept. Something in between those things that was still defining itself, still finding its edges, still dangerous in ways she hadn't fully mapped. Down the hall behind the closed doors of the war room, she could hear the sound of men's voices lower than usual, more compressed the tone of a conversation that was assembling itself around a specific purpose. And somewhere in the city below, two men who had made the mistake of putting their hands on the wrong woman were about to have the worst day of their lives. The city was quiet, the way cities go quiet right before something breaks. Lauren moved her mop in long, even strokes. She kept her chin up. She was a Moore, and Moors even now, even here, even in this did not fold. The two men's names were Danny Reyes and Carl Hutchins. Lauren learned this not from Giovanni, not from Thomas, but from the house itself, the way houses that hold secrets always eventually leak them through the cracks between closed doors and careful silences. She overheard the names on her third day back at work, spoken by one of Giovanni's men, to another in the corridor outside the linen storage room while she was inside counting towels, and apparently not worth noticing. Danny Reyes and Carl Hutchins. She filed the names away in the same quiet interior space where she filed everything she wasn't supposed to know, and she kept counting towels, and she said nothing. What she knew, they had been found. Thomas had confirmed as much with a single text Wednesday night, 2 words, no punctuation, the way Thomas communicated everything. Situation resolved. She had stared at those 2 words for a long time and felt something complicated move through her that she couldn't neatly categorize as relief or satisfaction or fear, because it was all 3 of those things braided together into something that had no clean name. What she didn't know and had decided deliberately not to ask was the specific shape of that resolution. Giovanni had told her no one would die over this. She had believed him. She chose now to continue believing him because the alternative was to pull at a thread that would unravel things she wasn't ready to look at directly. Not yet, maybe not ever. This was the specific moral negotiation of existing inside Giovanni Moretti's world she was learning. You drew your own lines. You decided which truths you needed to hold and which ones you were going to set on a shelf and not pick up. She wasn't proud of that, but she was honest about it. Thursday morning, she arrived at the mansion at exactly 6:58, and Marcus, for the first time in 7 years, did not appear with his clipboard to tell her she was late. She noticed this the way you notice when a sound that has always been in the background suddenly stops, not with relief exactly, but with a heightened awareness of the silence where the sound used to be. She changed into her uniform, pressed the badge flat against her chest pocket, and began her morning in the east corridor as usual. But usual was a word that no longer meant what it had meant a week ago. The staff had noticed. She could feel it in the way conversation shifted slightly when she entered a room, not stopping, not obvious, but adjusting the way water adjusts around a new object placed in it. 3 of the cleaning staff who had worked alongside her for years now made eye contact with her differently. Longer, more careful. A woman named Rosa, who had worked the West Wing for 9 years and had always been pleasant to Lauren in the efficient, distant way of coworkers who share a space but not a life, stopped her in the supply corridor on Thursday afternoon and said, "You okay with your face and everything?" "I'm fine," Lauren said. "Getting better." Rosa looked at her for a moment, not with suspicion, with something more complicated. "You went to him directly," she said quietly, not accusatory, almost wondering, like she was trying to understand something. "Yes." Rosa nodded slowly. "I've worked here 9 years," she said. "I never went to him directly. For anything." She paused. "I don't know if that was smart of me or smart of you." Lauren thought about that sentence for the rest of the afternoon. She turned it over while she worked at examining it from different angles. Rosa wasn't wrong to raise the question. The thing about crossing a line was that you never fully understood its weight, until you were standing on the other side of it looking back. She was still thinking about it when she turned into the Upper East hallway at 4:15 and found Giovanni standing outside his private office with a phone pressed to his ear. And he looked up when she appeared, and something in his posture shifted, a small unconscious adjustment, the kind of physical response that the body makes before the mind has decided anything. He said something brief into the phone, lowered it, and looked at her. "How's your jaw?" he said. "Better. The color is impressive still, but the swelling's down. Elena said you should have come back for a second check." "I've been busy." He looked at her with that expression, the recalculating one, the one she'd started to identify as what his face did when she said something that didn't match his expectation of her. "Come by the office when you're done with this floor," he said. It was not framed as a question, but it was softer than an order. She was learning to hear the difference. "Okay," she said. He went back into his office. She finished the floor with a methodical focus that was partially professional and partially the only way she knew how to manage the specific electricity of knowing he was 30 feet behind a door waiting for her to knock. She knocked at 5:40. He said, "Come in." She opened the door. The office was where he actually lived. She understood immediately, not in the formal rooms or the meeting spaces, but here. It was organized with the particular logic of a person who thinks in systems. Stacks of things that were actually ordered, not chaotic. A desk that held exactly what it needed to hold. 2 chairs facing the desk and one behind it, in the whole room carrying the residual weight of 1,000 decisions made inside it. He was behind the desk. He gestured at the chairs. She sat. "I want to talk to you about something," he said, "and I need you to hear it without making it smaller than it is." She sat straight. "All right. The 2 men, Reyes and Hutchins, have been dealt with. What that means specifically is that they've been removed from Vincent Caro's operation and made to understand with enough clarity that there won't be confusion that what they did has a permanent cost." He paused. "They're alive. They'll stay alive. What they won't have anymore is the comfort of thinking that putting their hands on the wrong person has no consequence." Lauren held his gaze. "Okay. Caro's territory dispute is also resolved. We negotiated a boundary agreement 2 days ago. His operation stays south of the line. We said ours stays north of it. The South Bronx corridor stays neutral." He paused again. "The incident with you was the accelerant that forced a conversation that should have happened 6 months ago. So in a strange way, I was useful," Lauren said. His jaw tightened slightly. "That is not what I was going to say. But it's true." She kept her voice even. "My face started a negotiation. I'm not saying it bitterly. I think it matters to say it plainly." He looked at her for a long moment. "You were hurt because of work you do for me," he said. "That's what's true. The rest is something I'm responsible for correcting, not capitalizing on." The directness of that landed somewhere in her chest with more weight than she was prepared for. She looked at her hands briefly and then back up at him. "Vincent's money is sitting in my kitchen drawer," she said. "I used some of it, the hospital bill. Friday deadline." She paused. "I need you to know that I used it for that specifically, not as something I accepted casually. I know exactly what your financial situation is," he said quietly. She blinked. "What?" He met her eyes steadily. "I know about your mother's debt. I know the amount. I know what you make and what it costs you to live and how long you've been running on a margin that doesn't exist." He said it plainly, not apologetically, not with embarrassment, just as information that he was sharing because the time for pretending he didn't have it was past. "I've known for a while. That's not surveillance. That's what happens when someone works in my house for 7 years and I pay attention to the people in my house." The silence that followed was one of the more complex silences Lauren had ever sat inside. She felt multiple things simultaneously: the instinct to be angry at the invasion of her privacy, the involuntary relief of being truly seen by someone with the power to actually help, the complicated question of what it meant that he'd known and said nothing for years, and underneath all of it, the particular emotional vertigo of having a life you'd worked very hard to keep private turn out to be legible to someone else all along. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "Because you told me you stayed, and staying means things are different." He held her gaze. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know things I know." She breathed through it. Okay, she said finally. Okay. She pressed her palms against her thighs and held herself steady. So what does different look like? He leaned forward slightly. Your salary doubles starting Monday. That's not negotiable and it's not charity. You do the work of 3 people and have done for years, and Marcus has been getting the benefit of that without the cost being corrected. He paused. Your mother's outstanding debt will be cleared by the end of next week. Not from the envelope. From me. Lauren opened her mouth. He held up one hand. Let me finish. He waited. She closed her mouth. Your sister's tuition. Her books. Whatever she needs to complete her degree. That is taken care of from this point forward. He paused. And you will have a car. Not a luxury, just reliable transportation so that you are never again walking through a Bronx alley at 9 o'clock at night in the rain, because the subway is the only option you have. Lauren sat very still. She felt something happening in her chest that she recognized as the particular physical sensation of having a weight removed that you've been carrying so long, you'd stopped feeling it as weight and started experiencing it as just the way standing feels, the way breathing feels. Normal. And then someone takes it off and suddenly you understand how heavy it actually was. Her eyes were burning. She absolutely refused to cry in this room. She pressed the emotion down with both hands metaphorically and kept her voice steady. That's a lot, she said. Yes. You don't owe me that. I don't do things because I owe them, he said. I do things because I decide they're right. He paused and something shifted in the quality of what he was communicating. Still controlled, still precise, but carrying now a note of something more unguarded than what he usually allowed. And because I should have done some of it years ago and didn't, and that's something I'm correcting. She looked at him. Why didn't you? He considered the question seriously. Because you were very good at being invisible, he said, and I respected that. I thought that was what you wanted. He paused. I was wrong about that. You weren't wrong, she said. It was what I wanted. I needed this job. I couldn't afford to be visible. Being visible meant being a problem or being something else I wasn't equipped to manage. She stopped. I don't know what I am now. You're someone who walked into a room with a bruise on her face and told me the truth when most people would have sat down and kept their eyes on the floor, he said. That's what you are now. She felt that land and held it. This is a very strange conversation, she said. Something happened in his expression that was closer to a smile than anything she'd seen from him before, not wide, not performed, just a slight release like a building letting out a breath. Yes, he said, it is. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Do you do this, the specific attention, with other people who work for you? He held her gaze. No, he said simply. The air between them was charged with the particular electricity of an honest answer given without decoration. Lauren sat with it for a moment and then did the thing she had started to understand was her particular survival skill in this new strange territory she was navigating. She filed the feeling away, precisely labeled it accurately, and set it on the shelf for examination later when she was alone and could afford to let it be as complicated as it actually was. I'm going to finish my shift, she said. You're done for the day. I have the Upper West Corridor still. Lauren. He said her name with that specific weight it had started to carry. You're done for the day. She stood. He stayed seated. She was at the door when she turned around because something had been sitting at the back of her throat since the meeting with Vincent Caro, and she needed to say it out loud to someone who would understand what it cost her to say it. I am grateful, she said, for all of it. The phone, the envelope, what you're doing for my mother's bills and Brittany's school. I'm genuinely deeply grateful. She paused. And I also need you to know that gratitude isn't the reason I stayed. I stayed because I chose to stay. Those are different things. Giovanni Moretti looked at her for a long moment. The expression on his face was something she was going to think about for a long time afterward, something rare and genuine, the look of a man who has operated for 30 years in a world where almost no one says anything to him, that isn't shaped first by what they need from him, and who has just heard something completely different and is sitting quietly with the unfamiliarity of it. I know the difference, he said. She nodded once and walked out. The hallway outside his office was quiet. She stood in it for a moment with her back against the wall beside his door and breathed carefully through her nose, 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Her mother's debt, cleared. Brittany's tuition, her own salary doubled. A car, things she had been carrying in her bones for years, the private arithmetic of survival that she ran in her head every morning on the subway, every night over the sink, rearranging themselves into a new set of numbers so unfamiliar she didn't yet know how to feel them. She pushed off the wall and walked toward the locker room. Rosa was coming the other way with her cleaning cart and stopped when she saw Lauren's face. "You all right?" Rosa said. "You look like you just heard something large." "I did," Lauren said. Rosa studied her. "Good large or bad large?" Lauren thought about that. She thought about everything in the office, and Elena's words about being taken care of versus being kept, and the specific sensation of a weight being lifted from her chest, and the complicated electricity of sitting across a table from a man who had just told her he wasn't willing to let her be business. She thought about how none of this was simple, how all of it required careful navigation, how the danger in this world was real and present, and not something she could afford to romanticize. She thought about Brittany's voice cracking on the phone. $412 by Friday. Their mother's face. "Good large," she said. "I think I'm still figuring out what it means." Rosa nodded slowly. "In this house," she said quietly, "when Mr. Moretti decides something, it stays decided." She looked at Lauren with that careful, complicated expression. "Whatever just happened in there, it doesn't go backward." "I know," Lauren said. She got her bag from her locker and walked to the side exit. Thomas was outside, leaning against a car she didn't recognize, dark, plain, reliable looking, exactly the word she'd used. And he held the car key out to her without ceremony. She stopped walking, stared at the key. "He said end of this week," she said. "He moved the timeline," Thomas said. She took the key. It was heavier than a key should feel. Thomas said, "I'll walk you through the paperwork tomorrow. Insurance, registration, everything's already handled." "Thomas," she looked at him, does this happen? This kind of thing? Has he done this before?" Thomas looked at her with his neutral camera eyes for a long moment. Then he said, "No, He paused. "I've worked for him 14 years. No." He went back inside. Lauren stood beside the car in the evening air, with the key in her hand and the Bronx waiting for her on the other side of the gate, and 7 years of invisible existence rearranged into something she hadn't chosen, but had at every decision point walked toward anyway. She thought about the night in the alley, the badge on the wet pavement, the way she'd picked it up. She got in the car. She adjusted the seat and the mirrors with careful precision. She put both hands on the wheel. She sat there for a moment in the quiet of it, the specific quiet of a space that was hers that no one could take from her, that locked from the inside. Then her phone buzzed. "Brittany," she answered. "Where are you?" Brittany said. "The subway tracker says you're not on any train." "I'm not on the subway," Lauren said. "Then how are you getting home?" "I'm driving." A pause. "What?" "I'll explain when I get there." She started the engine. "Put the coffee on." "Lauren, whose car?" "Put the coffee on, Brittany." She paused. "And call the hospital. Tell them the bill is being cleared by Friday." All of it. The silence on the other end of the line was the silence of a person who has been braced so long for bad news that good news requires a moment to be processed as a separate category of information. Then Brittany said in a voice that cracked completely open, despite every attempt to hold it together, "What did you do?" Lauren pulled out of the mansion's gate and into the street, and the city opened up ahead of her, lit and loud and relentlessly itself. "I'll explain everything," she said. "I promise. I'm on my way home." She drove. The city moved around her. Buildings and bridges and the specific rushing motion of a place that never fully stops. And Lauren Moore drove through the middle of it with her chin up and her hands steady on the wheel, and something in her chest that was not yet fully formed, not yet named, but was alive and growing in the space where a very old and very heavy weight used to live. Behind her in a house above the city, a man who had spent 30 years making decisions that rearranged the world was sitting at his desk in his office, and the room was quiet, and he was not on the phone, and he was not reading anything, and the people who worked for him would have said later that they had not seen him simply sit still like that, without a purpose or an agenda in a very long time. He was sitting still and thinking about a woman who had looked him in the eye and said, "Gratitude isn't the reason I stayed." Outside the city held its breath, not the held breath of fear, not tonight, something else. Something that felt, if you were paying attention, like the moment just before something changes permanently and you can feel it coming but can't yet see its face. Brittany was waiting at the door when Lauren got home. She had heard the unfamiliar engine in the parking lot below, had looked out the window, and had watched her sister climb out of a car that was clean and dark, and clearly not borrowed and not rented. And she had stood at the door with both arms crossed and her eyes doing the thing they always did when she was processing too many things at once, moving fast, reading everything, landing nowhere. Lauren walked in, set her bag down, sat at the folding table. Brittany sat across from her and said, "Start from the beginning." So Lauren told her. Not the version she'd told before, the edited, protective version designed to minimize Brittany's worry. The real version. All of it assembled, end to end, the alley, the badge, the decision to go to Giovanni directly, the meeting with Vincent Caro, the conversation in the office, the salary, the tuition, the hospital bill, the key in Thomas's hand. She told it plainly and without decoration, and she watched her sister's face move through the whole emotional register: fear, anger, disbelief, a complicated relief, something that looked very close to tears and got controlled before it broke the surface. When Lauren finished, the kitchen was quiet for a long moment. "He knows how much we owe," Brittany said. "He's known." "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know exactly." "A while," he said. Brittany pressed her lips together. "And that doesn't scare you?" "It should probably," Lauren said. "It did for about 30 seconds. And then I thought about the fact that he could have used that information at any point and never did. He just held it." She paused. "That's not the way someone uses leverage. That's the way someone pays attention." Brittany was quiet. She was doing the thing she did when she was working through something large, very still, very focused, her mother's eyes going deep. Then she said, "Lauren, do you have feelings for this man?" The question sat on the table between them with the weight of something that had been waiting to be asked out loud for days. Lauren looked at it honestly. She owed Brittany honesty more than she owed anyone anything. "I don't know what I have," she said. "I know something shifted. I know that when I'm in a room with him, I'm present in a way I haven't been present anywhere in a long time. I know that what he said to me in that office mattered to me more than it should have if he were just an employer." She held her sister's gaze. "And I know that his world is dangerous and complicated, and that I've been careful my whole life specifically to avoid complicated." "But," Brittany said. Lauren looked at her hands, at the plain short nails, the working woman's hands, the hands that had held a mop and a badge and a car key and an envelope and had pressed flat against a brick wall in the rain. "But I'm already in it," she said. "I was in it the minute I picked that badge off the pavement." Brittany breathed out slowly. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said something Lauren didn't expect. Mom would have liked him. Lauren blinked. "What?" "Not because of the money or any of that," Brittany said. "Because he sees you. Mom always said, she always said you needed someone who could see through all the invisible you wear like armor. Because underneath it, you're the loudest person in any room." She paused. She was right. Lauren sat with that for a long time. Long enough that the coffee went slightly cold. Long enough that the city outside the window moved back from evening into that particular shade of Bronx night that was never fully dark because there were always lights, always sound, always the noise of other people's lives pressing against the glass. She slept that night, deeply without interruption, for the first time since before the alley. She arrived at work Monday morning at exactly 6:54, 4 minutes early. She pressed her badge against the reader and walked through and changed into her uniform, and she was in the East Corridor at 7:15 when Marcus appeared, clipboard in hand, and said, "Your assignment has changed." She looked at him. "Changed how?" "You're moving to the primary household management team." He said it with a carefully neutral professionalism that cost him something. She could see it in the tight line of his mouth. 7 years of telling her she was late, and suddenly she was being reassigned upward past his organizational layer, and Marcus was the kind of man who took the architecture of hierarchy personally. "Effective today, you'll report directly to Mrs. Calloway on the main floor." Who made that decision? She said, though she already knew. It was communicated to me this morning, Marcus said, which was not an answer and was entirely an answer. She nodded. Thank you, Marcus. He looked at her for a moment, a complex look, not hostile, not warm, but containing somewhere inside it a reluctant acknowledgement. You do good work, he said, quietly, like it was a thing he'd known for a while and was only now deciding to say. Then he turned and walked away. Mrs. Calloway was a 63-year-old Irish-American woman who had managed the primary household of the Moretti residence for 11 years, who had seen 7 different iterations of the power structure in this building, and who greeted Lauren on her first morning in the new role by handing her a cup of coffee, real coffee from the main kitchen, not the staff room, and saying, I know who you are. I know what happened, and I know why you're here. I don't need you to explain any of it to me, Fries. She paused. What I need to know is whether you're the kind of person who learns fast. Yes, Lauren said. Good. Mrs. Calloway handed her a schedule. Then let's begin. The work was different. Not easier, harder, in some ways more demanding in its precision and its scope. The primary household team managed the formal rooms, the private quarters of the main floor, the coordination of events and meetings, and the 1,000 logistical requirements of running an estate that also functioned as an operational nerve center. Lauren absorbed it with the same focused attention she'd brought to every task in this building for 7 years. And Mrs. Calloway, who Lauren quickly understood, was not a woman who gave approval, casually said at the end of the first week, you belong in this work. You always did. What changed between Lauren and Giovanni in those 2 weeks was not dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It was a series of small things that accumulated meaning the way water accumulates a drop at a time until suddenly there was weight. He was present in the main floor more than he'd been before. She told herself this might be coincidence, routine, the natural rhythm of his schedule. She stopped telling herself that after the 3rd time he found a reason to be in a room she was working in and stayed longer than any practical purpose required. He asked her questions not about the work, not about Marcus or the East Corridor. About her mother when she'd gotten sick, what she'd been like before. About Brittany's field of study at community college. About what Lauren had wanted to be when she was 17, before the wanting had to get set aside in favor of the needing. She answered honestly. She always answered him honestly because she had discovered early that dishonesty in his presence felt not just wrong but physically uncomfortable, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. He had a quality of attention that made evasion feel more exhausting than truth. One evening, 11 days after she'd moved to the primary floor, she was finishing a task in the main sitting room when he came in and sat down in the armchair near the window and said, "Sit down for a minute." She sat. There was nothing formal about it. No table between them, just 2 people in a room at the end of a day. "You seem different this week," he said. "Different how?" "Less braced," he said, "like you've been waiting for something bad to happen and you've started to believe it might not." She looked at him. The accuracy of that landed in her chest with a small, clean impact. "My mother's hospital called Friday," she said. "Zero balance. They read it twice. The woman on the phone sounded confused." She paused. "Brittany cried for 20 minutes. She's never cried over a phone call before. Not for a good reason." Something moved through his expression. Not pride, something quieter. The expression of a person who has done something that mattered and is sitting with the mattering of it without needing to name it. "Thank you," Lauren said. "I know I already said it. I'm saying it again because it deserves to be said more than once." "How's your jaw?" he said. "Almost completely healed. The color is gone, just a faint, barely visible." She touched the side of her face briefly. "Elena did a follow-up on Thursday. She said it healed clean." He nodded. He was looking at her with that direct, unhurried attention. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable." Her pulse moved slightly. "Okay. Are you happy here?" He paused. "Not grateful, not safe. Happy." The question was so precise and so unexpected that she sat with it for a full moment before responding. Happy. She turned the word over and tested it against the actual texture of her days. The work she did now, which used her mind as well as her hands, the car in the parking lot, the number in her bank account that no longer lived in the red, Brittany texting her last night with a photo of new textbooks, actual new textbooks, purchased without asking whether the money existed. Her mother's face the one time she'd been able to call and say, "Mom, the bills are handled. Stop worrying about the bills." "Yes," she said, and then because she owed him the full truth, "And I don't entirely know what to do with that. I've been operating in survival mode so long that happy feels disorienting. Like a room I don't know the furniture layout of, and I keep walking into the edges of things." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to one she'd heard from him. Low, brief, genuine. "That's an honest answer," he said. "You said you wanted one." "I did." He paused. He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him deciding something, the internal machinery of it, visible in the quality of his stillness. Then he said, "I've been in this house for 22 years. I've had hundreds of people work for me. People who were loyal, capable, smart." He paused. "None of them ever came into a room where I was holding court over a man who owed them an apology and told that man to his face in front of me that their face was personal." He held her gaze. "I've thought about that every day since." Lauren felt the heat climb her throat. She held it down. "It wasn't calculated," she said. "I just said what was true." "I know that. That's why I've thought about it every day." The silence between them was charged with everything that had been building over 2 weeks of coffee questions and hallway conversations, and the specific attentiveness of two people circling something they hadn't yet put words to. Lauren sat inside that silence and felt it clearly for the first time, not as confusion or vertigo, but as something actual, something with weight and direction. "This is complicated," she said. "Yes." "Your world is dangerous, Shisa." "Yes," he said again, without apology, without the softening deflection she might have expected, just the plain truth of it offered to her the same way she had always offered him plain truth, and she recognized that for what it was. "I'm not a person who belongs in your world," she said. "I don't mean that as self-deprecation. I mean it as a factual statement about where I come from and who I am." "I know who you are," he said quietly. "That's precisely why this conversation is happening." She looked at him for a long moment. "You said to me in that first meeting, you said staying means things are different." She paused. "I need to understand what different actually means, not the salary, not the card, the rest of it. What this is." He stood. She stood too, not sure why, just feeling the shift in the room's energy and responding to it. He was across the room from her, not close, not performing any kind of pressure, just standing and looking at her with the full directed weight of his attention, and he said, "I'm not offering you a transaction. I'm not asking you to be something you're not, or to live in a world you didn't choose." He paused. "I'm telling you that I would like the opportunity to be in your life in a way that isn't defined by what you clean or what I own." He paused again. "If that's something you want." Lauren Moore stood in the main sitting room of a mansion she had cleaned for 7 years, with her chin level and her hands at her sides, and she felt her weight of her life behind her. Subways and the hospital bills and the sold kitchen table and the invisible armor and every morning of counting towels and keeping her eyes down, and she felt the specific shape of this moment, this room, this man asking her not to disappear. "I'm not good at this," she said. "The whatever this is, I don't have a lot of practice with people asking me what I want." "I know," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She took a breath. "Then yes," she said, "that's something I want." He didn't move toward her. He just looked at her with that expression, the rare, genuine one, the one that dismantled the controlled architecture of his face and showed the person underneath it, and nodded once slowly the way a man nods when something he has been waiting for with patience finally arrives. "Go home," he said. "It's late. It's 8:15. "Go home, Lauren." She got her bag. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back because there was one more thing, one more true thing that needed to be said out loud between them before this day closed. 7 years ago, she said, when I started here, I was 20 years old. I came because I needed money, and I stayed because the money was steady, and I kept my head down because I couldn't afford the cost of being seen. She held his gaze across the room. "I'm 27 now. I needed someone to find me. I just didn't know I was lost." She paused. "Thank you for noticing." He looked at her with something full and quiet. Go home, he said softly. Drive safe. She drove home through the city. The Bronx moved around her, lit and loud and honest, and Lauren drove through the middle of it with both hands on the wheel and the radio off and the window down slightly so the night air came in, and she thought about her mother and Brittany and the badge on the wet pavement and the way everything in a life can pivot on one small decision. Made in the dark, the decision to pick something up instead of leaving it. The decision to walk right instead of left. The decision to say what is true in a room full of people who are waiting for you to stay silent. She parked in her spot below the building, sat for a moment in the quiet of the car. Then she picked up her phone and called Brittany. Hey, Brittany said, you on your way up? Yeah, Lauren said, in a minute. You okay? Lauren looked up through the windshield at the lights of the building. They were building the one she could actually afford, now the one she no longer had to do mental arithmetic about at 2 a.m. She thought about Happy and how disorienting it felt, and how she was learning the furniture layout of it, slowly one edge at a time. Yeah, she said, I think I actually am. She got out of the car. She locked it behind her. She walked to the building door with her chin up and her shoulders back, and the key in her hand that she had earned, not inherited, not been handed, but walked toward one choice at a time, starting from the night as she hit the pavement and decided that the most dangerous thing she could do was nothing. Lauren Moore had spent 7 years learning to be invisible. It turned out that all that time the city had been waiting for her to finally be seen. And now that she was, she intended to stay that way.